Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Spider-Man 2099 Omnibus. Now, this is a book that was very highly anticipated by a lot of people I know, and it's also one that seemed to get pushed back quite a few times in terms of its release date, to the point where I think quite a few people were wondering whether or not this actually would be released. Well, of course, it has been. A few weeks ago now this came out, and it's certainly something I've had a good time reading over the last few days, having not read through a lot of this material before, so it's still kind of fresh in my mind. And with that being the case, I thought it would be a good time to give an overview of this book and share some of my thoughts on this material, maybe help you make up your mind as to whether or not this is a book you want to check out yourself. So, before we dive in and take a look at this properly, let's just have a look at the dust cover here. What I went for was the DM variant cover, a bit of artwork here by Jim Fern. I thought that was a really cool pose. The other variant, which is possibly the most popular one of the two, is the classic Rick Leonardi cover to issue 1, which is obviously also a great cover. Looking around the rest of the DM variant version of the cover then, most of it's going to be the same as what you get on the other one. I think there's a slightly different version of Spidey down there, depending on which cover you go for, but the back is going to be the same either way, and what you get on here is a good bit of insight into just how much material is in this book. And let me tell you, this is massive. This is about 1,400 pages, I think. It's got a lot of material collected within this book. It's the full original 90s series of Spider-Man 2099, plus an annual, some crossovers with other series that were running alongside it. All in all, yeah, a massive book, a huge chunk of material, and like I say, it took up quite a bit of my time to kind of get through this and read it all in the last few days. But to give you an idea of the thickness of the book, if we just take a look at it itself, you can see it is really nice design, kind of across here. I love this on the back as well, this close-up image of Miguel with his fangs and claws, very cool. This image as well also, I haven't really mentioned that, but that's a great one from early on in the series. Let's look in the book then. I just want to give a spoiler warning before I kind of dive in and take a look at this, because like I say, I've just read through the full thing. It is fresh in my mind, and I do want to kind of touch on some of the things that happen in the story here, because all in all, I think this is a really great read, a very strong series with some excellent writing by Peter David. If you've followed me for a while or happen to have seen my reviews covering these books before, I've talked about Peter David in a lot of detail, especially in relation to his Incredible Hulk run, which I've thrown a lot of praise at because that's one of my absolute favourite runs. I love his writing style, and reading through this book, like I say, having not read through most of it before, even though I feel like it's something I probably should have got to before now, but I can just say that that still holds up here, as it does with his Hulk run. Peter David's writing here was just outstanding at times. He's got such a great way with humour, with characters, and developing relationships between those characters. It's just all great stuff in here. I got really invested into the story from pretty early on. We've got a contents page here, which again, just showing you the vast amount of material that we've got in this book. All 46 issues of that 90s series of Spider-Man 2099. And it all starts here, obviously, then with issue 1. So this is that classic Rick Leonardi cover. I think this is probably the cover that comes to mind for a lot of people when you think of this character. And who is this character then? So this is Miguel O'Hara, and this is New York in the year, would you believe it, 2099, or Nueva York, as it's kind of more commonly known during this era. This opening splash page is just fantastic stuff. I mean, from very early on, this lets you know, I think, that Rick Leonardi is going all out here, and I think that there's some outstanding artwork, to be honest, from various artists in this book, but the Rick Leonardi stuff, which takes up most of the first, just over half of the series probably. I think the first 25 issues, most of the first 25 were penciled by Leonardi, who does an excellent job. And we are introduced then to this futuristic setting, and Miguel O'Hara, who is a scientist, a genetic scientist working for this company Alchemax, which is this huge corporation that is effectively in control of large aspects of society. You know, it's got the police force is part of Alchemax. The laws are effectively set by Alchemax. It's this whole idea is that at this point in the time, society is basically no longer so much governed by politicians, but rather by big company and big business, you know. So that's kind of like the idea. And we're introduced to this guy, Tyler Stone, who is Miguel O'Hara's boss, and who is kind of a slimy CEO type character. But there's plenty of other cool, fun characters in here. So this hologram kind of VI assistant that Miguel's got, called Lina, She's kind of this very amusing kind of artificial intelligence kind of thing that lives in his house. It's kind of his home computer. Some cool stuff happens with her. There's various love interests in here. Here's that great image again, just from the end of the first issue. I'm not going to be able to touch on everything. You know, this is a massive amount of material and a lot of stuff happens, but basically, Miguel's kind of creepy boss gets him hooked to this super addictive drug as a way to force him to stay with the company and to work for them. As a means of trying to cure himself of that addiction, Miguel conducts an experiment on himself which effectively mutates him so that he has the Spider-Man powers, because it's taking a strand of DNA that has somehow been obtained from the original Spider-Man, Peter Parker, and he kind of bonds it to himself and becomes a sort of Spider-Man variant. Now, in terms of powers, he has a lot of the same classic kind of Spider-Man powers. He can obviously stick to walls. He's got the enhanced strength and speed and agility. He's got a couple of other things, though, are kind of unique to him. So he's got the claws and fangs, which are more of a mutation. The fangs are also poisonous, so he's got a venomous bite if he happens to bite anybody. His sight is also adjusted, so he's more sensitive to light, and it's described as kind of enhanced vision, so he can kind of perceive things faster than the human eye can. I think he can see things sort of further away as well, but like I say, it makes him more sensitive to light, so bright light kind of affects him quite a lot. Yeah, really cool character, I've got to say. You know, I think following Miguel, he's got this kind of dry sense of humor, he's very sarcastic. He's also kind of flawed, you know, he's by no means a perfect protagonist in the sense of being, you know, a selfless hero all the time. He's quite, often quite arrogant, just a little bit flawed in various ways. Like I say, I won't go into every single aspect of that. I'm trying to keep this fairly brief. But I realise we're still very early on in the story. So Miguel has got a brother, Gabriel, or Gabri, not sure the pronunciation of that, but he features in quite a lot of the story. He has a fiancée called Dana. He has an ex-girlfriend called Sheena, or Xena. Again, some of these pronunciations I'm maybe not getting quite right. But yeah, a lot of dramatic things happen. There's a cool dynamic between all these characters. Things get quite complicated, very soap opera at times. And we see some interesting villains, obviously. We're seeing the 2099 version of the Vulture. This was actually a really cool story. This Vulture is a real kind of a freaky dude. He's turned out to be a cannibal. Yeah, quite dark stuff. There's quite a dark tone to a lot of this story, actually. It's quite disturbing at times in some ways. Like I say, it can be quite mature with its themes and content. Not massively so. I mean, one of the funny things I thought throughout was some of the language is quite entertaining, because it's kind of this whole idea of, you know, futuristic slang. So everybody's using the word shock. Everything's like, you know, it's shocking this, shocking that. It's great. I kind of liked that. It was quite cheesy, but I thought it was fun. Yeah, all in all, just really cool. I mean, Peter David, man, you know, he's just a great writer, and he does a great job of making these characters interesting. And one thing he always did well, you know, in his Incredible Hulk run, and that continues over into this run as well, is kind of foreshadowing things that are coming down the line and bringing things back into the story that happened earlier on. So you might get something that happens in issue 1, for example. Miguel meets this very minor character when he first becomes Spider-Man, and then that character is kind of, in what to me was quite surprising anyway, surprisingly brought back a couple of times later on in the series in a very effective way. A couple of very memorable stories. I feel like I'm skipping over so much here, but to talk about it all in detail would make this such a long video. In this future, there are kind of different kind of pseudo-religions and cults. There's this big one called the Thorites. They all predict the return of Thor. They all dress up as Asgardians, and like I say, they're awaiting the return of Thor, and they prophesizing his coming and all that, and they think that Spider-Man is a prophet of the return of Thor. You get this bit about close to halfway through, there's this crossover. This to me was the weakest part of the book, I will say. There's this storyline where seemingly Thor does actually come back, and that runs through a few different issues of different 2099 series. So you've got Ravage, there's X-Men 2099, Punisher 2099, and Doom, as in Doctor Doom 2099. And I kind of enjoyed this the least. out of all of the stuff that I read through in this book, just because I think this is often the case. It's not unique to this, but when you're reading a story and it spills over into other series that you're not reading and you're not following, then it's kind of hard to get invested, because when you get an issue like this, issue 5 of X-Men 2099, now I've never read X-Men 2099 ever, don't know any of these characters, so to just get thrown into an issue of this is a little bit jarring, because obviously you know, you're not following this series when you're reading through this book, and if you don't know those characters, then it's kind of hard to get invested in that part of the story. So I don't know if maybe you agree with that, but it's something that I think is a bit of an issue when you get a crossover like this. But it also just happened to be that the story itself, you know, separate to that, I don't think was great. This Return of Thor story wasn't, it was probably the weakest thing. Again, here you're seeing, you know, a random Punisher issue that's collected in here. I mean, it's good, obviously, for the sake of completionism. It kind of needs to be there, I suppose, and it's good that they've included it. But personally, I could have skipped over that story and felt fine just jumping ahead to this bit when you get back into the main Spider-Man 2099 series. Yeah, so Peter David wrote almost all of this. He wrote 44 issues. The final 2 issues, he then left the series over basically disputes with Marvel. Marvel were going to do something different with the 2099 line. They fired the editor of the series, and Peter David kind of said, well, if he's going, I'm going. I don't agree with what you're going to do. So the last couple of issues in here are written by someone else. I think it's Bob Kavanagh, something like that. But most of it is Peter David. It's probably 98% Peter David's writing, and that's such a highlight for me. There were several times, honestly, many times probably throughout reading this, where I just had a smile on my face, because I think that his kind of comedic style and timing with some of the stuff that happens in here, there's some really cool visual gags, funny lines that genuinely had me almost laughing to myself. And then you start to get these really cool backup features as well, actually. This is a good example of one where you see Miguel as a kid in this kind of boarding school he was in. And we see a lot of stuff that happened with him and his first girlfriend, this girl here, which I'm mispronouncing, I'm sure. I'm going to go with Xena. I'm going to call her Xena. And then a lot of the stuff that's happening in those flashbacks starts to tie into the stuff in the present. And that's really cool. So definitely enjoyed that. That starts happening about halfway through the content in here. Without touching on those details, here's a really cool moment where I say that character comes back from earlier on. This is the annual, actually, I think. The Spider-Man 2099 annual, which is in here. Yeah, just really strong material. You know, it's been quite a while since I kind of sort of binge read through an omnibus, you know, in a very short amount of time. But I got this book about a week ago. And as I say, it really is, you know, it's a large omnibus, a lot of pages in here. And I managed to read through it in just a few days, which I think shows just how much I got invested in this story. So definitely something I recommend, absolutely, especially since I kind of think this is an omnibus which might become hard to find and possibly even go out of print before too long, you know, because like I said, this is a book that a lot of people are waiting a long time for, and I think that it's also the first time this series has ever been collected in full, and I don't just mean in a big omnibus, but I mean in general. I don't think there's even been a set of trade paperbacks or anything in the past that have actually collected all of this series, so this is a big deal. Certainly for long-time fans of the series. As I said, I'm only just really discovering all of it. I'd read maybe the first 10 issues or so of it a few years ago, but this is the first time I give the whole thing a chance, and definitely don't regret that. I think it's an omnibus well worth picking up whilst it's around, if you're able to get it. And it also has quite a good sense of an ending as well. So this is technically volume 1. There is going to be a second volume, but really this is self-contained. You know, I don't think there's really specifically any need to get the second volume. If you just want to get the original series, that's literally all in here. You know, it's the full series, which did have a kind of proper ending. Not that every single loose end is tied up, unfortunately. That's not the case. But certainly I didn't feel like I'd been left on a major cliffhanger or anything like that. You know, it felt like it could have just been a self-contained omnibus without needing to specifically label it a volume 1. We're seeing some of the later issues in here then. This is where we get a version of Venom introduced. At this point, Rick Leonardi has left the series. For the last few issues in here, probably the last 10 or so issues, the main artist is this guy, Andrew Wildman. Not really familiar with his artwork from anything else, gotta say, but I did like it in here. It's very 90s, you know, it's got that serious kind of mid-90s look to it. That style obviously is pretty distinct from other art styles and other eras, and I think that is absolutely the case here. But it's all good, you know. Like I said, I mean, honestly, there was no bad artwork in this book. There was nothing that put me off with any of the artists who work on here, because, excuse me, although Rick Leonardi is kind of the main one, and then this guy Andrew Wildman comes in at the end. There's a few other guest artists. You get an issue or two by Ron Lim. Jim Fern obviously does an issue, I think. I can't remember, there's probably one or two others as well. But honestly, nobody does a bad job. Everyone who did any work in this series produced some cool artwork, I think. And this really is a great omnibus. I mean, I don't know if it would necessarily make it into my favourite ever books, but it's kind of close. It might do. I don't know. I'd have to think about it a little bit. Maybe let it digest. As I say, I've only just read through it. And I like to kind of think on these things and really consider it, you know, and I'll probably reread it at some point, I'm sure. But yeah, no, I definitely really enjoyed it. No doubt about that. This is a story as well towards the end. This is cool. This is where Spider-Man 2099 meets Spider-Man. So Miguel goes back to his past, our present, and meets you know, Mary Jane and J. Jonah Jameson and everybody. Peter Parker goes to the future in 2099 and meets you know, Gabriel and a couple of other characters from Miguel's time, and it's quite interesting. It's quite a fun story. Venom shows up, the original Venom this time. I think that probably the last couple of issues in here, which I've also mentioned, are the two that are not written by David, are probably the weakest ones, because it kind of feels like what happens towards the end of Peter David's run in the sort of 43rd, 44th issues, the last couple of issues. There's this version of the Green Goblin who shows up, and it very much seems like Peter David was setting up one particular character to be revealed to be the Goblin, and then in those last couple of issues, sort of like the other writer that comes in, just kind of very swiftly change direction and reveal it to be somebody else who it doesn't seem like was really the intention for that character to be revealed in that way. But it's still fine. You know, these last couple of issues are okay. I mean, this is issue 45, so this is back here. This is the end of Peter David's final issue, issue 44, with Spider-Man kind of walking off, with Miguel walking off with his mum, and that kind of felt like a nice ending in a way. So these last couple of issues, in a way, I could have almost done without reading them. But again, you know, obviously here for completionism, good to have them here, and they were by no means bad issues. They just kind of changed something. I won't spoil the specifics, I guess, but it was fine, yeah. But anyway, all in all, a really good read, and definitely something I recommend. This is a massive omnibus. It's absolutely huge. Quite a good extra section at the back here as well. There's quite a few things that were initially promoting the 2099 line before it all started to kind of kick off. Some cool covers and different promotional images. This is all pretty fun. Had a flick through this just like last night, actually. Yeah, good stuff. Honestly, a great omnibus. It probably would make it into one of my favourite Spider-Man omnibuses at this point in time. And let me know, of course, what you think of this omnibus, of this series, of this character. If you've read it before or plan to pick it up, feel free to comment and let me know. But that will be that. Thank you very much for watching as always. That's appreciated. I'll be back again soon to discuss something else.